The night was quiet until a scream ripped through the darkness, sharp enough to freeze every breath in the room. Detective Mark Sullivan said, "This isn't just an accident, something is terribly wrong." His eyes darted across the kitchen, searching for answers as his chest tightened. A faint metallic stench lingered, clinging to the air like a warning. Emma Carter whispered, "I don't understand. She was fine just minutes ago." Her trembling hands hovered over the lifeless figure on the floor, as if touch could reverse fate. The glass cup beside the victim glistened with a residue that shimmered unnaturally under the flickering overhead light. The refrigerator hummed, an oddly calm sound that clashed against the tension saturating the room. Mark crouched, his face grim, his fingers brushing the faint trace of powder along the rim of the cup. Emma stepped back, her voice cracking, "Please, tell me she's going to be okay." The silence that followed was heavier than any answer. Shadows stretched long against the tiled walls, as though even the room recoiled in horror. The crime had begun, and no one here would leave unchanged. The kitchen smelled of spilled chemicals, its metallic bite stinging the nose. Mark stood, his jaw tight as he muttered, "This isn't random, Emma. Someone wanted her gone." Emma staggered against the counter, clutching it as though it could hold her grief steady. Her whisper trembled, "No, it has to be a mistake." The overhead light buzzed, a cruel reminder that the world hadn't stopped even as hers collapsed. Mark's eyes narrowed on the glass, its residue like a confession too bold to hide. He had seen this before, traces of a silent killer that didn't leave second chances. Emma pressed her palms against her face, shaking her head furiously, refusing the truth that stood inches away. She was just laughing, just smiling. "And now this?" she cried, her voice breaking like shattered porcelain. Mark's silence pressed heavier than his words could. He had to move carefully, for grief could blind and guilt could kill. The case had already claimed its first piece of innocence, and it would take much more before it ended. The hum of the refrigerator became unbearable, a sinister rhythm marking the seconds of silence. Emma said she trusted everyone, Mark. Who could do this to her? Her question cut through the air like a blade, demanding a name he couldn't yet give. He pressed his hands into his pockets, his thoughts racing faster than his words. A family's bond broken by poison was more than just murder. It was betrayal sharpened into venom. He turned to Emma, voice low and deliberate. "The truth is here in this room, and it will speak." Emma's lips trembled, the weight of his words shattering what little denial she had left. Her eyes fell once more on Anna's still form, and she whispered a prayer no God could answer. The night pressed harder against the windows, shadows peering in as though hungry for the tragedy within. For Mark, the evidence whispered, and he vowed to force it to scream. Mark's mind sharpened as if the poison had entered him too, coursing with urgency. He muttered, "No sign of forced entry, no broken locks. Whoever did this was close, trusted." Emma's head jerked up, her tearful eyes wide with sudden realization. She shook her head furiously. "No, don't say that. It can't be someone she loved." The silence that followed was louder than screams. Every picture frame on the walls stared down, frozen witnesses to the unseen crime. Mark crouched again beside Anna, his fingers tracing the faintest trail of residue across the tiles. He whispered to himself, "A toxin. Subtle, fast, deliberate." His words weren't just observation. They were prophecy. Emma collapsed onto a chair, shoulders shaking, her grief spilling like a flood uncontained. The night was no longer safe. It had become a battlefield of truth and lies. And Mark knew the war had only just begun. The clock ticked on the wall, its hollow rhythm taunting their helplessness. Emma whispered, "She had no enemies, Mark. None." Her words collapsed under the weight of denial, but her eyes begged for a different truth. Mark rose slowly, his broad frame casting a shadow that stretched across Anna's body. His tone was steady, but his stare betrayed the storm within. Enemies don't always come from outside. Sometimes they're the ones closest to us. Emma recoiled, shaking her head in disbelief, her breath catching like glass shards in her throat. A faint knock echoed from somewhere beyond the kitchen, so soft it felt imagined. The sound carried a chill deeper than the night air. Mark's jaw set as he turned toward the hallway. The story was no longer just tragedy. It was danger waiting in the shadows. The early morning sun crept through thin curtains, painting the living room in pale gold, yet the house felt colder than night. Emma sat on the couch, her body hollow, clutching Anna's scarf tightly, as if it were a lifeline. Mark stood near the window, his silhouette outlined in the glow, his voice even but heavy. Every clue tells me this wasn't chance. Someone planned this, and we will find them. Emma whispered. She trusted too easily. Maybe that was her downfall. Her words trembled like glass ready to crack. Silence lingered, broken only by the ticking clock, counting seconds into eternity. Emma's heart carried grief like a weight, pressing deeper with every breath. Mark's gaze hardened as he muttered, "The closer we look, the more the truth will resist us." The morning's fragile light couldn't soften the reality. It only illuminated wounds that would never heal. Emma's hands shook as she spoke. She was my little sister, Mark. She believed love made people good. She never saw the danger. Her voice cracked into fragments, leaving silence more powerful than words. Mark leaned against the mantel, his eyes steady on her but his thoughts elsewhere. "Love doesn't blind everyone," he said quietly, "but it blinds enough to make betrayal possible." The room smelled faintly of stale coffee, cups left untouched on the table like forgotten promises. Emma's shoulders hunched, her frame sinking deeper into the couch, as though it were swallowing her sorrow whole. "Do you think she suffered?" she asked, almost pleading. Mark's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "It was fast," he lied gently, though the residue told him otherwise. Truth was a weapon he could not yet draw. Emma closed her eyes, as if darkness was kinder than the light of memory. The faint creak of a floorboard upstairs drew Emma's attention, her eyes flicking upward with sudden fear. Mark noticed and spoke softly, "You're safe." But safety doesn't erase danger, it only delays it. His words felt like a verdict neither of them could escape. Emma's fingers fumbled over the scarf, twisting it tighter, her body trembling with each memory. "Anna always said our family was unbreakable," she whispered, "but now it feels like we're shattered glass." The air hung thick, carrying grief like smoke filling a room. Mark's expression hardened, his voice firm. "Families don't break on their own. Someone broke yours and that someone will slip." His words carved into the silence, harsh and unrelenting. Emma leaned forward, her tears dropping onto the wooden floor, tiny echoes of devastation. Hope seemed thin, fragile, almost foreign, as though belonging to another world entirely. Mark stepped closer, lowering his voice so it struck deeper. "Emma, grief can bury the truth, but if you let it, the truth will be lost forever." Emma's eyes brimmed with tears as she whispered, "And what if the truth kills me too?" Her fragile voice cracked, her body trembling as she spoke. The walls around them seemed to close in, family photos watching silently, reminders of a world forever gone. Mark's gaze fixed on Anna's smiling face in one of the frames, his voice sharp with determination. "The person who did this counted on silence. But silence won't win." Emma pressed her forehead into her palms, her sobs muffled against her skin, the sound like a breaking string in an abandoned violin. Outside, a car drove by, its faint engine, a cruel reminder that life carried on for others, while theirs stood still in ashes. The room was silent, except for Emma's uneven breaths. Finally she lifted her head, eyes swollen but sharper than before. "I want answers, Mark," she said, her voice thin yet laced with steel. Mark nodded, his face grim. "Then we start with the people closest. Love and trust don't exclude motive, they hide it." Emma leaned back, her body exhausted, but her resolve clear, the weight of truth pressing heavier than grief. The scarf in her hand slipped into her lap, no longer a shield but a relic. "If it was someone close," she whispered, "then none of us are safe." Mark's eyes darkened, his silence agreeing more loudly than words could. The morning light faded slightly, clouds sliding across the sun, plunging the room into a muted gray. It was not only grief that had entered this home, it was suspicion, sharp and merciless. Rain drummed softly against the window of the precinct as Mark spread crime scene photos across the table. His voice was cold but steady. Poison doesn't choose at random. This was calculated, meant to strike deep. Emma sat across from him, pale and restless, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. "But why, Anna?" she whispered, her tone desperate, as if speaking her sister's name might bring her back. Mark's eyes lingered on a photograph of the glass rim, the residue stark in the harsh print. "Because Anna trusted the wrong person," he muttered. A silence stretched, tense and heavy, as Emma's eyes burned with fear and confusion. "You think it's someone she loved," she said sharply, her voice trembling between grief and accusation. Mark leaned forward, his stare unrelenting. "I don't think. I know." The storm outside mirrored the storm between them, every drop a reminder that time was slipping, and danger was near. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and old dust. Mark leaned against the wall as Tom Hayes, Anna's colleague, shifted uneasily in his seat. "I already told you," Tom muttered, his tone defensive. "I barely knew her outside of work." Mark's voice cut through the air, low and sharp. "Barely knowing someone doesn't mean you couldn't want them gone." Tom clenched his jaw, sweat foaming at his temples, his eyes darting nervously toward the mirrored glass. Emma watched silently from the other side, her breath quick and shallow. Her fists pressed into her lap, nails digging into her palms, a storm of anger swelling beneath her grief. Mark leaned closer to Tom, his words slow and deliberate. "Poisons don't lie, Tom. They speak when people want." Tom swallowed hard, shifting again, his silence thicker than any denial. Suspicion hung heavy, and trust felt more fragile than glass. The hallway outside the interrogation room echoed with footsteps, tense and uneven. Emma confronted Mark, her voice sharp. "You're wasting time with him. Tom isn't the type." Mark's gaze stayed hard, his tone clipped. "Everyone's the type until the evidence clears them." She shook her head violently, frustration and despair colliding. "This isn't about evidence, it's about people who loved her." Mark's eyes darkened, his voice rising just enough to sting. "And love is the perfect cover." Emma recoiled, her breathing ragged, as her back pressed against the cold concrete wall. Mark's voice softened slightly, though no less firm. "I've seen it before. The ones closest cut the deepest." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the muffled buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Their grief had begun to fracture, turning allies into opponents, their bonds stretched thin under the crushing weight of suspicion. That evening, the storm outside deepened, thunder cracking across the sky as Mark sifted through Anna's phone records in his office. His brow furrowed as unfamiliar numbers lined the screen, one repeated more than the rest. Emma hovered at the doorway, her voice low. "What did you find?" Mark didn't look up, his voice taut. A connection she kept hidden, someone she called often but never mentioned. Emma stepped inside, her stomach tightening as dread climbed higher. "Do you know who it is?" Mark finally lifted his gaze, eyes hard as stone. "Not yet, but whoever it is, they were important to her. And maybe they're the reason she's gone." The room fell into silence, broken only by the rattling windows as rain beat harder against the glass. Secrets were surfacing, and with them, the edges of a darker truth sharpened. The night pressed heavy on the precinct, thunder shaking the glass as Mark spread the records across the table. Emma's voice broke the silence. What if the person she trusted most is the one who killed her? The thought hung like poison itself, thick and suffocating. Mark's reply was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease. "Then, that's who we'll find." His tone was firm, but the certainty didn't reach his face. Emma lowered herself into a chair, her frame trembling, her grief shifting into fear of betrayal. "If it's someone close, Mark, then none of us are safe," she whispered, her eyes glistening under the dull light. Mark leaned forward, his hands pressing flat on the table, his voice grim. "Safe isn't an option anymore. Truth is." Outside, the rain hammered relentlessly, a mirror to the storm now raging within their lives. The storm had quieted into a steady drizzle by morning, but the tension inside the precinct thundered louder than the night before. Mark's eyes scanned the phone records again, and this time the number repeated in Anna's log finally clicked. His face tightened as he whispered, "It's not a stranger." Emma leaned forward, gripping the table, her voice urgent. "Who is it?" Mark hesitated, his jaw set in steel, then uttered, "Daniel Carter." Emma froze, her blood running cold at the name. Her brother, the one she trusted most, the one who swore to protect them both. Her voice cracked. "That's impossible. He loved her." Mark's voice carried no softness, only fact. Then love wasn't enough. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as betrayal pressed like a dagger at Emma's heart. She shook her head violently, muttering, "No, you're wrong, you have to be wrong." But the truth had no mercy, and its shadow now pointed directly at her own family. Emma's breath came fast as denial battled the evidence in front of her. "Daniel would never hurt her," she cried, her voice trembling like a child's. Mark's gaze was unflinching, his tone relentless. He called her every night the week before she died. And on the night she was poisoned, he called her twice. Emma shook her head, memories of her brother's smile and warmth flooding her mind, clashing with the cold reality of the records. "He was there for us when no one else was," she whispered, her body curling into itself as if trying to shield against the truth. Mark leaned closer, his voice low. "That's what makes betrayal work. It hides behind love until it's too late." Emma's tears fell freely, her heart breaking not just for her sister, but for the family that now felt like a stranger's. The room darkened with the weight of revelation, each second drawing them closer to confrontation. The hallway outside the interrogation rooms buzzed with tension as Mark prepared the file. Emma leaned against the wall, her body shaking, whispering her brother's name over and over like a prayer against fate. "Daniel can't be part of this," she muttered, her voice breaking. Mark turned sharply, his tone firm. "We bring him in. If he's innocent, the truth will clear him. If he's guilty, no amount of denial will save him." Emma's chest heaved as she nodded slowly, her faith collapsing with every word. A uniformed officer stepped forward, handing Mark a report that confirmed the call logs and location data. Mark's face tightened. He was with her the night she died. Emma's knees weakened, her back pressing against the wall as though it were the only thing holding her upright. Her whisper cracked into the silence, "Then I've already lost both of them." Daniel entered the precinct calmly, his face unreadable, his voice steady as he asked, "What's this about?" Emma's eyes locked on him, her breath caught between love and suspicion. Mark studied Daniel closely, his words sharp. "It's about Anna. It's about the last night she was alive." Daniel's jaw twitched, but his eyes betrayed no panic. "She called me, yes. She needed me." Emma's voice cracked as she stepped closer. "Needed you for what?" Daniel turned his gaze toward her, his expression torn between pain and defiance. "For protection," he said softly. Mark slammed the folder onto the table, photographs spilling out, his voice rising. "Protection doesn't end in poison, Daniel. It ends in betrayal." The silence that followed was electric, every breath charged with suspicion and grief. Emma's tears blurred her vision, but she saw enough to know her world was unraveling. Emma's hands trembled as she reached toward Daniel, her voice breaking. "Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't hurt her." Daniel's eyes softened, and for a moment he seemed like the brother she knew. "I tried to save her," he whispered, his voice desperate. Mark's face hardened. "Save her? With poison in her veins?" Daniel shook his head furiously. "It wasn't me. She was afraid, she begged me to protect her, but I failed." His words collided with the evidence on the table, truth and lies tangled so tightly, Emma couldn't breathe. She stepped back, her sob catching like a blade in her chest. Mark's voice thundered through the room, "Then prove it, Daniel. Because right now the only thing we see is blood on your hands." The weight of the revelation pressed down, crushing hope, leaving only fear that the truth was darker still. The precinct was silent, except for the storm raging outside. Mark stared at Daniel, his voice steady but heavy with finality. You were with her the night she died. Explain why she's in the ground, and you're still breathing. Daniel's fists tightened, his knuckles pale as he snapped, because I wasn't the one who poisoned her. Emma's sob broke through, her voice pleading. Stop lying, please, just tell me the truth. Daniel's face crumpled as he shouted, I loved her. I loved her more than anyone, and that's why she called me. The confession cut like glass, Emma gasping as her world shifted again. Mark's jaw clenched, voice sharp. Love doesn't kill, poison does. Daniel leaned forward, eyes blazing. Then looked deeper. Someone else was there. The room pulsed with raw emotion, a storm within walls already cracking. The truth was clawing to be heard, and the battle for it had reached its breaking point. Mark's voice cut through the tension like steel. If you're hiding something, now is the time. Daniel's chest rose and fell rapidly, his eyes darting between Mark and Emma before he whispered. She was in trouble. She told me someone was watching her. Emma's heart pounded, her voice trembling. Who? Daniel's face twisted, shame flashing across his features. I don't know. She wouldn't say. She just begged me not to tell anyone. Mark slammed his palm onto the table, fury rippling. You kept this secret, and now she's dead. Emma collapsed forward, her sobs echoing through the cold room. Daniel's eyes locked onto Mark, voice hoarse. I thought I could protect her. I thought love was enough. The truth clawed at the air, jagged and incomplete. Suspicion shifted, but the wound of betrayal still bled too deep to close. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside. Mark leaned closer, his voice low but lethal. You had motive, you had access. If you didn't kill her, then who did? Daniel's jaw tightened, his hands shaking as he hissed. You're looking in the wrong place. It wasn't me. It was someone inside her world. Emma lifted her head, her face pale, whispering, inside her world. Daniel nodded sharply. Her work. She told me she uncovered something dangerous. Mark's eyes flickered, suspicion colliding with revelation. And you let her face it alone? Daniel's voice broke, raw and ragged. I didn't think they'd go this far. Emma's body shook as fear twisted into anger. So she died because no one believed her, she cried. The truth was splintering open, jagged pieces cutting deeper than before, and with them, a storm of rage began to rise. The room felt like a furnace, every breath heated with anger and despair. Mark's voice was sharp. She uncovered something? What was it? Daniel slammed his hand down, his voice breaking. I don't know. She wouldn't tell me. She said the less I knew, the safer I was. Emma's sob twisted into fury. And now she's gone because you kept quiet. Her voice shattered like glass, echoing off the walls. Daniel's eyes burned as he turned toward her. Do you think I wanted this? I loved her more than anything. Mark's hand sliced through the air, silencing them. Love won't save you from justice. Evidence will. The silence that followed cracked with tension, every second heavy with truth clawing to the surface. The storm outside raged louder, lightning flashing across the precinct windows, a reflection of the fire tearing them all apart. The air was thick with rage and grief, no longer just about guilt, but about survival of truth. Mark slammed the folder shut, his voice thunderous. We're done with games. Either you give me a name, or I will bury you under this evidence. Daniel's chest heaved, his face pale, his eyes locked on Emma. I swear to you, it wasn't me. But if you want a name, look at her office. Look at her files. That's where the poison started. Emma gasped, clutching her chest as realization clawed at her. Her work, she whispered. Mark's stare was ice, his voice final. Then tomorrow we open her world. And if you're lying, Daniel, you won't see the sun again. The storm roared outside, but inside the room, silence was louder, a silence carved by betrayal, grief, and a truth still buried in shadows. The following morning, the world looked washed out under a pale gray sky. Mark and Emma entered Anna's office, its silence sharp, papers and files neatly stacked as though waiting to speak. Mark muttered, "If Daniel is telling the truth, this is where the answers lie." Emma's eyes scanned the familiar space, her heart heavy. She spent nights here. I told her to rest, but she said her work mattered more. The desk smelled faintly of ink and dust, the air heavy with secrets. Mark flipped through her files, his brow tightening as he uncovered notes with cryptic markings. Emma's hands trembled as she touched the framed photo of Anna smiling on the desk. "She looks so alive here," she whispered. Mark's voice cut through the grief. Alive, and fighting something bigger than we knew. The weight of discovery hung in the room like smoke, suffocating yet undeniable. Mark spread Anna's handwritten notes across the desk, the paper filled with names and red underlines. Emma leaned closer, her voice cracking. She was tracking someone. Mark's jaw clenched. Not just one, a network. His finger traced a circled name. This wasn't personal, Emma. It was professional. She knew too much. Emma's body tensed, anger mixing with grief. So she died for doing the right thing. Mark nodded grimly, his voice low. She was silenced because she was close to exposing them. The rain outside pattered softly, a cruel contrast to the storm rising in Emma's chest. She whispered she believed in justice, and it killed her. Mark's gaze hardened. "Then we finish what she started. That's the only way this ends." The room seemed to breathe heavier, the truth filling it with a presence almost alive. Emma's hands trembled as she read Anna's words scrawled in the margins. "If anything happens to me, it's because of them." Tears blurred her vision. "She knew she was in danger," Emma whispered, her voice hollow. Mark's expression darkened, his tone firm. "She was trying to leave a trail for us." The room seemed to shrink, every file a monument to her fight. Emma pressed her forehead against her palms. "She was so close, and I didn't see it." Mark stepped closer, his voice softer, but resolute. "You weren't meant to. She carried it alone to protect you." Emma's shoulders shook with sobs, grief crashing against her like a tide. Mark straightened, determination cutting through the heaviness. "We have enough now. Whoever poisoned her thought the truth would die with her, but they were wrong." The evidence was boxed, each folder like a piece of Anna's voice preserved. Emma traced her hand over the cardboard, her whisper faint. "She left us her truth." Mark sealed the box with steady hands, his eyes fierce. "And we'll make sure it's heard." The sound of tape cutting across the cardboard echoed like a gavel striking judgment. Emma leaned against the desk, exhaustion pressing her down, but there was a spark in her gaze now, faint but growing. "Do you really think this will bring them down?" she asked. Mark's reply was simple but unwavering. "It will bring us closer, and closer is enough for now." Outside, the rain had stopped, but clouds still lingered. A gray veil stretched across the sky. The war wasn't over, but the silence was finally broken. As they walked out of the office, Emma paused, her eyes fixed on the empty desk. "It feels wrong to leave her behind," she whispered. Mark placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his voice steady. "We're not leaving her. We're carrying her forward." Emma nodded faintly, her throat tight, her grief reshaped into fragile resolve. The hallway stretched long and narrow before them, the sound of their footsteps echoing in unison. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also stronger, each echo a promise to the one they lost. "She deserved more than this," Emma said softly. Mark's voice followed like a vow. "And she'll have more. Through us." Together they left the building, stepping into the gray morning where the storm had broken, but the fight had only begun. Night returned heavy and cold, the precinct lit only by desk lamps. Emma sat in silence, staring at the box of files. Her whisper broke the stillness. "She fought so hard, now it's our turn." Mark stood across the room, his eyes on her, his voice steady. "Justice doesn't end with one arrest. It ends when the truth can't be buried anymore." Emma lifted her gaze, determination flickering in her tired eyes. The shadows on the walls felt like they leaned closer, listening. Outside, sirens wailed faintly, a reminder of the chaos beyond these walls. Emma's grip on the box tightened. I won't stop. Not until they pay. Her voice no longer broke, it carried steel. Mark nodded slowly, the weight of his own battles etched deep in his face. The night swallowed their silence, but within it, resolve glowed like embers refusing to die. The files spread across the desk glowed under the lamplight, names and notes etched in Anna's hand like her final testimony. Emma ran her fingers across the ink, whispering, "Every word is a piece of her." Mark's voice was low. "And every piece builds a weapon against them." The room felt alive with Anna's presence, her fight echoing in every line of writing. Emma's lips pressed tight, her tears drying into resolve. "She gave us everything. We can't fail her now." Mark leaned closer, his voice quiet but strong. "We won't." The ticking of the clock grew louder, the moment stretching as though the world held its breath. The weight of the truth was heavy, but heavier still was the vow between them. A vow carved from grief, sharpened into purpose. The hallway outside the precinct was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Emma and Mark walked side by side, the night air biting against their skin. Emma whispered, "When this is over, nothing will ever be the same." Mark's gaze stayed forward, his tone steady. "It's not about being the same, it's about finding what's left after the truth." The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement, their steps echoing in rhythm. Emma's hands curled into fists, her voice firm. "I'll find them. Whoever did this, I'll face them." Mark's eyes softened slightly, though his voice carried steel. "You won't be alone." Their silhouettes stretched ahead, two figures carved by loss but bound by a mission larger than themselves. The night swallowed their words, carrying them into the darkness like vows etched into stone. Later, Emma stood alone in her sister's bedroom, the air still carrying faint traces of her perfume. She touched the framed photo on the nightstand, whispering, "I'll finish what you started." The room felt suspended in time, every detail unchanged yet hollow. Mark appeared in the doorway, his voice soft. "She'd want you to keep living, not just fighting." Emma turned, her eyes red but sharp. "Living means justice. For her, for us." Mark nodded silently, his shadow stretching across the floor. The silence carried weight, both tender and brutal, a reminder of what was lost, and what was yet to be won. Emma placed the photo back gently, her voice steady. "This is where it begins, not where it ends." The night outside pressed against the windows, but inside, resolve burned steady as fire. The final moments of the night fell heavy as Emma stepped outside, the door closing behind her with a hollow thud. The air was cold, the moon hidden by clouds, the street stretching endless ahead. Mark stood beside her, his voice low, final. "The storm isn't over, but we're still standing." Emma's eyes lifted to the horizon, her face streaked but resolute. "And we won't fall until the truth is free." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty, it was thick with promises unspoken. The camera of the world lingered on their faces, their eyes marked by pain but fueled by fire. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the only sound cutting through the quiet. The night swallowed them, but not their vow. The fight had begun again, and it would not end until justice tore through the darkness.